Hello बच्चों, you are with Bindu Chaudhary and we are pursuing our chapter 6 weavers, iron smelters and factory owners of our past, part 3rd. And in this chapter today we are taking question answer sessions in our part 4th. But before taking question answer, let's recall the previous one. Yes, we had already read in the chapter reading about the weavers, different tribes or different types of weavers in the Bengal, north part and south part. And we had already discussed about Dorabji, Tata and Weld, geologist. Okay, and one thing more, how they searched from one village to the another village, how they searched for the iron ore from one forest to the another forest, and the invention came and at Jamshedpur, and near the bank of the river they established their iron and steel plant Tisco. So Tisco only manufactured starting in a very small way, but after the First World War what happened, the demand of iron and steel came high, rise up very much, and on that time see what happened, the Britain and European markets exchanged that one and they totally gave the material to the First World War. And on that time those Tisco persons needed to be supply for the purpose of the railways. First of all, British railway officers refused that no, Tisco is not in a position to supply because the quality may be less or low. But later on what happened, Tisco supplied everything in a very good way, in a very high rate of standard, and when factory owners also taking initiative for the best iron and steel. So here is the some recall clips for the chapter reading, and now we are taking our question answer session here. See, this one is the first question. What kinds of cloth had a large market in Europe? When we are talking about weavers, when we are talking about the clothings, then on that time what type of clothes had a large market in Europe on that time? We had already discussed about the cotton clothes. Okay, so here in the answer session we will write step by step. See, chintz or chint in the European language, koses or khasa and bandana. These are different types of clothing material. Bandana word was derived from the word बंधन. बंधना वर्ड कहाँ से आ रहा है बच्चों? बंधन. आपने देखा छोटे छोटे चने की दाल, मूंग, मोठ, इन सबको बांध बांध के छोटी छोटी जो बंधनी के टाइप की प्रिंट की जाती है, मे बी समटाइम्स इन अ बिग वे, एक बड़े वे में भी उसको बाउंड अप करके उसके लिए मटेरियल तैयार किया जाता है. इट रिफर टू अ वैरायटी ऑफ ब्राइटली कलर्ड क्लोथ प्रोड्यूस्ड थ्रू अ मेथड ऑफ टाइंग एंड डाइंग. टाइंग और डाइंग जो मेथड है, फ्रॉम दैट मेथड दिस क्लोथ was prepared and a brightly colored material, brightly colored clothes were used on that time. This one is the different question about Zamdani. What is Zamdani? Zamdani is a muslin on which decorative motifs are woven on the loom, typically in grey and white. अलग ही तरह का जामदानी जो है उसको क्या कहते हैं, एक तरह से फाइन मुस्लिन होता है और उसके ऊपर बहुत ही डेकोरेटिव मोटिव्स के रूप में वुवन द लूम्स, एंड टिपिकली इन विच वे, टिपिकली इन द ग्रे एंड वाइट कलर्स वर यूज्ड इन द जामदानी. ओके, नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन हेयर. We had just talked in the first question about bandhani. Same here. What is bandana? Bandana is a brightly colored and printed scarf for neck and head, especially for the purpose of the neck and for the purpose of the head. These bandana used, and these were typically brightly colored and printed स्पेशली वी विल कॉल बहुत ही अच्छे चमकीले रंगों से जिसको रंगा जाता है. दिस वर्ड वॉज डिराइव्ड फ्रॉम द वर्ड बंधन. सो वी विल राइट दिस वन आल्सो इन दिस क्वेश्चन. इट रिफर टू अ वैरायटी ऑफ brightly colored clothes produced through a method of tying and dyeing. Same here also in the bandhani, tying and dyeing method is using, and in this method different colorful, brightly colorful colors were used on that time, and especially when we need some brightly colored neck or head cover, then especially these bandana is at present also in trend. At present also we are using all these things. Our next question is, who are the agaris? Let's recall about the agaris in our chapter reading session. हमने आपको बताया था agaris के जो men's and women's है, they are taking basket loads on their head of iron ores, and दोराबजी टाटा एंड दैट वेल्ड सर्च्ड आउट. अरे ये लोग क्या लेके जा रहे हैं अपने सिर के ऊपर, बहुत ही अलग टाइप का है, और वही अलग टाइप का जो वो है खोज रहे थे. सी हियर, ग्रुप्स ऑफ मैन्स एंड वुमेन कैरिंग बास्केट लोड्स ऑफ आयरन आर नोन एज अगारीज. सो हियर द कंसेप्ट इज क्लियर टू ऑल ऑफ यू. लेट्स स्टार्ट फॉर द नेक्स्ट वन. फिलिप्स. द वर्ड छींट कम्स फ्रॉम द वर्ड, जो छींट वर्ड है वो कहाँ से यूज आया है बच्चों? इट्स फ्रॉम द चेंट्स. ओके, नथिंग मोर. हमारे यहाँ इंडियन जो वर्ड है इसी को ही जो ब्रिटिशर्स है उन्होंने भी यूज में लिया था. नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज, टीपूज स्वॉर्ड वाज मेड अप ऑफ विच टाइप ऑफ स्टील? It's a wood steel. So the answer is Tipu's sword was made up of wood steel. The next one here, India's textile exports declined in the which century? Yes, it declined in the 19th century, because in that time some British and European markets gave their clothes to the market, even in India also. That's why Mahatma Gandhi's movement boycott foreign clothes started on that time. और इसीलिए हम क्या कहते हैं, जो हमारा इंडियन एक्सपोर्ट है वो बहुत ही डिक्लाइनिंग पोजीशन में चला गया था. Here is our next question. How do the names of different textiles tell us about their history? This one is the important one. How these different textiles tells their name. See here, European traders first saw fine cotton cloth from India in Mosul in present day Iraq. पहले मोसूल में ढूंढा था, जिसको हम क्या कह, अब ये कहाँ पे है बच्चों? अब यह है इराक में है. सो यूरोपियन ट्रेडर्स फर्स्ट सॉ दिस फाइन कॉटन क्लॉथ इन इंडिया. सो दे रिफर टू ऑल फाइनली वोवन टेक्सटाइल एज मुस्लिम्स. और इसीलिए उन्होंने जितनी भी टेक्सटाइल्स थी, वोवन टेक्सटाइल्स थी, उनको क्या नाम दे दिया गया बच्चों? उनको नाम दे दिया गया मुस्लिम. Portuguese first came to India in search of spices and landed in Calicut on the Kerala coast in southwest India. We had already discussed about in the previous chapters that first of all East India Company came to India for the purpose of the trade, but after that Portuguese also came, and they came here in search of spices, and they landed near Calicut on the Kerala coast on the southwest India, and they here only came for the search of the spices. But later on many things happened. See, they took back cotton textiles to Europe. This one is the main changes occurred in the textile market along with the spices, because not only Portuguese took spices from India, they took these cotton textiles to Europe for the purpose of the selling, for the purpose of the wearing. they named it कालिको. उन लोगों ने इसको कालिको नाम दिया बच्चों. क्यों नाम दिया कालिको? क्योंकि वो स्टार्टिंग में फर्स्ट दे लैंडेड इन कालीकट on the Kerala coast. That's why they gave this one the name of Calico, became the general name for all cotton textile. And later on what happened? Calico becomes the general name for the all textile, means especially of cotton textiles. Many other words point the popularity of Indian textiles in western markets also. This one muslin is one thing, then after what happened? Calico textiles, then many other words also came in this in the western market. The pieces included printed cotton clothes called cheens, kosas or khasa. So different names had given to the cotton material and different names given to the cotton textile exported in Europe, especially this one Calico, only because they landed at Calico near the Kerala. When we are talking about bandana, see, bandana is a brightly colored and printed scarf for the neck or head. Bandhana especially used for wearing in the neck and head, and this one is the totally brightly colored material or brightly colored colors were using in this bandhana. This term was derived from the word bandana और हिंदी फॉर टाइम. हिंदी में हम जिसको कहते हैं ना बांधना, उसी बांधने को, उसी टाइम करने को ही यहाँ पे बंधना कहा गया है. Other clothes were known by their place of origin. When we are talking about the different names for the purpose of the cotton textile, means see here, other clothes were also known by their place of origin. For an example, Kasim Bazar, Patna, Calcutta, Odisha and Charpur. यहाँ पे हम क्या देखते हैं कि अलग अलग जगह पे जो मटेरियल यूज़ किया जाता है उनके नाम भी उन्हीं के ऊपर रख दिए गए थे. The widespread use of such words shows how popular Indian textiles had become in different parts of the world. That's why we are feeling proud, and that time our cotton textile market and the material exported from India was in a higher range. But later on we see that after the Britain cloth material, Britain cotton textile material used and they exported that to India. Only on that time our cotton textile market becomes in a declining mode. But later on again we see that it is in a very progressive mode. See our next question here. Why did the wool and silk producers in England protest against the import of Indian textile in the early 18th century? Why the producers of the wool and silk of European markets or England's were in a protest mode? That they are in a position that why the import of Indian textiles is necessary, why they are not in a way to welcome this Indian textiles. See the answer here. Textile industry had just begun to develop in England in the 18th century. In the starting of the 18th century, only and only some textile industries had just in a position to develop in England. So the wool and silk producers in England found themselves unable to compete with Indian textile. This one is the great position because Indian textile material was in a very high, fine material was used there. So these producers of England, maybe for wool or maybe for the silk purpose, they were not in a position to compete with the Indian textiles. So they wanted to secure the market within the country by preventing the entry of Indian textile. This one is the main reason why they wanted that Indian textile will not be imported in England. आपको खुद को पता है क्यों उन्होंने कहा कि भैया हमारे यहाँ पे इंडियन टेक्सटाइल नहीं आना चाहिए? Reason behind it, because they just started near about in the early 18th centuries. Therefore, they protested against its import. So, this one is the main reason that the material of the Indian textile was of so much fine material, so much high qualities material was there. That's why Indian textile was in great demand, and England was not in a position to compete with the Indian textile. See here the next one. How did the development of cotton industries in Britain affect textile producers in India? Just we had discussed that cotton industries were developed in Britain and Europe and England. So, what effect in Britain these textile producers to in India? See this one. Cotton industries in Britain developed and adversely affected textile producers in India in several ways. Many points were there for the answer of this question. The first one is Indian textiles faced competition from British textiles in the European and American markets because the quality of the material was in a very fine position. That's why Indian textile faced competition with the British textile in the European and American markets because they also produce cotton textile materials. So, the next reason is export of textiles to England became more and more difficult because Britishers didn't allow them, because they had paid some taxes for that one. See here, because the British government imposed very high duties on Indian textiles. So, Indian textile developers or producers were not in a position to our material to Britain or in other foreign markets, or we will say European and other foreign markets. So, this one is the second main reason. Next one is, in the beginning of the 19th century, cotton textiles made in Britain successfully ousted Indian goods from their traditional markets in Africa, America and Europe. This one is the main reason that the market was so much in a position to compete, because Britain successfully ousted the main parts of the markets of Africa, America and Europe, where first of all Indian textile was used. But later on Britain material was also in a position to compete there. So, here is the another reason. Next one is, thousands of weavers in India were now thrown out of employment because the main spinning and tuckly and other process by women or by men were in a very good position before this Britain market. But after that what happened, when our material was not in a position to import to the another foreign market, then the position of unemployment raised very high. So, Bengal weavers were in the worst hit because Bengalese material was in a very high quality. Next one is, English and European companies stopped to buy Indian goods. Next one is, the agents no longer gave out advances to weavers to secure supplies. Before this one, before the entering of the Britishers, our weavers got some amount for the security of the supply of the material. But later on what happened, this was refused and they didn't get any advance amount for the supply for the security purpose. Distressed weavers wrote petitions to the government to help them. जब कहीं कोई पोजीशन नहीं हुई तो बच्चों हमारे यहाँ के जो वीवर्स हैं उन्होंने गवर्नमेंट को एक पिटिशन लिखा कि आप हमारी हेल्प कीजिए. See here, By the 1830s, British cotton cloth flooded Indian market. Again, the main reason of declining of the Indian textile was that Britain cotton clothes flooded over in Indian markets. That's why actually by the 1880s, 67% of all the cotton clothes worn by Indian were made of cloth produced in Britain. So this one was the very worst position of that time, and this affected not only specialist weaver but also the spinners, because these markets involve everything Britain material used here, and the Indian people also wore clothes which were supplied by the Britain. So this one is the another reason. Thousands of rural spinner women were rendered jobless. We had already discussed about the women's work of spinning, women's work at home. So after coming material from the Britain market, all the 67% material was coming here. So all our weavers became jobless and hopeless also. This one is the main reasons. Women on that time not only doing their household works as well as they are in the weavers indus family also. So this one is the great problem for themselves, for the unemployment purpose, for the jobless purpose. Next question here. Just before this question number 9 up to question number 8, we had discussed about the weavers, we were discussed about the textiles market. In this question we are discussing about the Indian iron ore. Okay, why did the Indian iron smelting industries declined in the 19th century? ऐसी क्या पोजीशन हो गई थी कि इंडियन आयरन स्मेल्टिंग इंडस्ट्रीज जो हैं वह डिक्लाइनिंग मोड पे आ चुकी थी? See here, there were several reasons for the declining of the Indian iron smelting industry. The first one is the new forest laws of the colonial government prevented people from entering the reserved forest. As we had already discussed in our chapter 4th about the rules, about the forest laws imposed by the forest officers to the tribes, when we discussed about the tribes chapter on that time. So these new forest laws prevent people entering in the reserved forest. The main reason this one. Then next one is, now it became difficult for the iron smelters to find wood for charcoal. When in a position of new forest laws, no one is in a position to enter in the forest, then how woods will be collected for the purpose of the charcoal? So getting iron ore was also a big problem on that time. Hence many gave up their craft and looked for other jobs, because new forest law exploit our Indian market. Next one is, in some areas the government did grant access to the forest. कई इलाकों में तो फॉरेस्ट के लिए ग्रांट भी दी गई, but the iron smelters had to pay a very high tax to the forest department for every furnace they used. This one is again the main reason for the declining of the Indian iron ore smelting industries, because these smelter had given a very high tax to the forest department for every furnace process. So this reduced their income. They were not in a position to gain their own profit as well as their own expenses occurred on that material. So by the late 19th century, iron and steel were being imported from Britain. We had already discussed about this one in our chapter reading session, that before the 19th century, everything was in a position to import from Britain. Ironsmiths in India began using the imported iron to manufacture utensils and implements. हम क्या देखते हैं, स्टार्टिंग में तो क्या हुआ, हमारा जो इंडियन मार्केट है, जो भी मटेरियल ब्रिटेन से हमारे यहाँ आता था, उसी मटेरियल से यूटेंसिल्स और दैनिक जीवन की चीज़ों को बनाया जाता था. This inevitably lowered the demand for iron producers by local smelters. So this one also was the main reason for the producers of the local smelters. All these reasons caused the declining of the Indian iron smelting industries. So this one was the great position for the declining of our Indian iron ore smelting industries. Next question here. What problems did the Indian textile industry face in the early years of its development? स्टार्ट ही हो रही थी उस समय हमारी जो इंडियन टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्रीज हैं, उन्हें किन किन प्रॉब्लम्स को फेस करना पड़ा. सी हियर द आंसर. ड्यूरिंग द अर्ली पीरियड ऑफ इट्स डेवलपमेंट, द टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्रीज इन इंडिया faced many problems. We will take it step by step here. The first one is, in most countries, government supported local manufacturers by imposing heavy duties on imports. This one is the main reason that heavy duties were imposed for the import material. So this finished the competition and protected their infant industries. This one is the reason why the foreign industries were in a very developing mode on that time. English producers wanted a secure market within the country by preventing the entry of Indian textiles. So here is another big reason that English producers always prevented that no Indian textile was in a position to import to them. So British government enacted the कैलिको एक्ट. और आप देखिए कि हमारे यहाँ के कैलिको के नाम से ही, कालीकट हम जिसको बोलते थे, उसी के नाम पे ही जो ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट है उन्होंने कैलिको एक्ट बनाया था. The colonial government in India usually refused such protections to local industries. When we are talking about the Indian markets, then on that time we are under the British government, and on that time these colonial government already refused for the protection of the local industries. They only import material from Britain. When we are talking about iron ore and steel or TISCO, this question is based on that one. What helped TISCO expand steel production during the First World War? What were the circumstances on that time for the expansion of these steel production? See here, before the First World War, India imported British steel for रेल्स. पहले जहाँ हम देखते हैं 1853 में हमारे इंडिया में रेलवेज स्टार्ट हुआ था, एंड फॉर रेलवेज मटेरियल ऑल द थिंग्स वर इम्पोर्टेड बाय द ब्रिटिश स्टील कंपनीज. सो व्हेन इन 1914 द वार ब्रोक आउट, पहला विश्व युद्ध छिड़ गया था बच्चों. ऑन दैट टाइम स्टील प्रोड्यूस्ड इन ब्रिटेन now had to meet the demands of the war in Europe, because on that time there was very high demand in the Europe for the material used in the First World War, and these Britannies producers collected that material and sent that to the Europeans. So imports of British steel into India declined on that time, and the Indian Railways turned to Tisco for the supplies of the rails. This one is the main reason. First of all, Britain English steel material was used, but after First World War broke out, that British material was used in Europe, and that's why these Indians railways turned to Tisco for the supply of the steels or rails. As the war dragged on for several years, Tisco had to produce shells and carriages ways for the war. हम क्या देखते हैं बच्चों, यहाँ पे रेलवे को तो पूर्ति की ही जा रही थी, बट ओवरऑल आफ्टर द सप्लाई ऑफ द रेलवेज, Tisco started to produce shells and carriages ways for the First World War also. By the 1919, the colonial government was buying 90% of the steel manufactured by Tisco. So, what was the position on that time? First of all, these colonial government refused to take the material by Tisco, but later on, after the break of First World War, things changed and Tisco supplied near about 90%, not only to the railways but also to the First World War materials for the Europeans also. So, over time, Tisco became the biggest steel industry within the British Empire. हम जब ब्रिटिश एम्पायर के अधीन थे तो उस समय जब हम बात करते हैं टिस्को की, so Tisco became the biggest steel industries of that time. This was the proud movement for Tisco as well as ourselves. This one is next question here. Find out about the history of any craft around the area you live in. आपके आसपास कोई भी क्राफ्ट का काम चल रहा है, उसको आपको ढूंढना है. You may wish to know about the community of craftsmen, the changes in the techniques they use and the markets they supply. See the question here. First of all, you wish to know about the communities. The next one is the changes of the techniques they use, and the next one is the markets they supply. How have these changed in the past 50 years? Not only present era is discussing here, we will take past 50 years experience of these craftsmen. So, see here in answer session, history of handloom weaving. First of all, जब हम हैंडलूम वीविंग की बात करते हैं बच्चों, स्पिनिंग ऑफ थ्रेड, दिस वन इज द फर्स्ट प्रोसेस. देन वीविंग बाय झुलासाज इन द विलेज. झुलासाज जो हैं वो विलेज में काम करते हैं. सेल ऑफ द फैब्रिक इन द लोकल मार्केट. कहाँ पे बेचा जा रहा है बच्चों? लोकल मार्केट में ही सप्लाई की जा रही है. लूम्स वर सेटअप फॉर दीज पर्पज. Fabric woven for local, national and international markets were also common in that time. So, power looms were also international markets. It means up to this extent, not only local market is covered as well as international market is also covered by these zulasas in different ways. See changes in the past 50 years. Constitution of All India Handloom Board in 1952. This one is the starting of the Constitution of All India Handloom Board. So, this one is the starting in the 1952. Next one is government support for the supply of yarn, dyes, chemicals, etc. This one is the great benefit. So, what changes occurred here? See, government supports for the supply of yarn, dyes and chemicals to the weavers. Encouragement by giving awards. This one is the great example that government time to time encouraged these weavers by giving awards, prizes, etc. insurance covered against calamities, etc. Because sometimes weavers tie and dye, weavers used their material, weavers used their prints, bandhani and etc. But maybe some of the circumstances, trend changed. Maybe some of the circumstances, what happened, rain came, and on that time calamities, by calamities everything disposed. On that time government gave them some insurance cover for this purpose. So this is our question answer session here, students, and in our question answer session we had discussed about the things we covered in our chapter reading. In the next chapter we will meet again. So let's start a new journey of reading question answer session, learning process and writing process. Have a nice day.